In this project, I'm just going to be using a piece of scrap walnut, which I had lying about. Besides for a piece of glass, actually 2 pieces of glass in this project. I'm not actually using anything. I'm not actually paid for anything. I'm just using stuff that I had laying about. Seeing as I have not charged my customer for this. This is one of my good customers of mine, and I ended up using barter instead of money for this project, meaning I got some services out of them. I think that's the best way sometimes, is swapping something for something instead of always charging. It just makes it a lot easier. Well, I hope he doesn't mind me saying, but this customer's actually a dentist. I wanted my teeth whitening, so instead of paying for that, I just swapped this project for that. Now, when he first came to me with it, he just came to me with this piece of leather here that you see here, with a drawing. It's actually a copy of a picture that he had of himself. He's a scribe, and he had this picture of the wall of him finishing the scroll, scribing the scroll, and he had this person copy this picture for him onto a piece of leather. So he just said to me, can you put it on a piece of wood? And I didn't just want to stick it on a piece of wood and just make it look like it's just been stuck on there. So I had this idea of sandwiching it in between 2 pieces of glass within this nice wooden frame, and I got this Hebrew writing stuck on top, which actually comes from the verse in the Torah where it talks about a scribe. Now, I wanted to get more footage on the CNC, but that footage you saw at the beginning, that's the only footage I had, and that footage is just off my friend's phone. Was it my phone or my friend's? I can't remember, but yeah, I would have liked to have got more footage on that. Here you see me, I'm just making these tenons on the end of this wood, on the end of this rail, and I'm making most of the tenon. I'm cutting out on the table saw. I made this really cool jig. It's very simple, it's just a board that runs along my fence, and I've got these clips, so I could just clip a long piece of wood vertically up on the side. I just set the height of the saw blade, and I can cut quite accurately like that. I'm just cutting the ends here using my Cat Moses dovetail guide. It's got a 90-degree edge on it, which is magnetic, so it keeps the saw blade straight. To make my mortises, I use this jig. I've had this jig for some time. It's called the Beadlock Pro, and you have a series of holes there at the top, which you would you drill in, then you end up with these holes. A bit hard to explain, and then you slide the thing over like half the diameter of the actual hole, so you end up making yourself this shape, a very specific shape called a beadlock. But I'm not using the beadlock right now, I'm just doing a general tenon. I'm just using it to cut the holes, as it's an amazing guide. And you see now I switch out that one, stick in the other piece, which is just a straight hole, and I slide the drill back and forth, and it's basically like giving myself floating tenon. Now, as you can see here, by mistake drilled all the way through, which when it happened for a second I did think, oh no, I've probably messed up, but you'll see soon it was actually a miracle. It actually served me really well for this project. So I didn't catch the full footage, but this is basically, you get the idea of what I'm doing here. I used a biscuit slotting bit on the router table just to cut a slot out the center of this frame. I've not actually glued the frame together, you see it move there, and I basically just kept going back and forth on it until I had the right thickness, the thickness of the 2 pieces of glass with the leather in between. The other thing my customer wanted, he wanted to make sure that you could see that it's just a scrap of leather. A funny thing about this is the lady who made it, she actually just scribbled it onto a piece of leather on a hotel bed while she was on holiday or something, within about 20 minutes, apparently. And I spent hours and hours and hours making a frame for it to click into. I had to use epoxy resin to glue these joints together because by the time I'd cut out all these tenons, when I originally made the frame, they were quite tight. By the time I cut out the tenons and I cut the groove for the glass, there wasn't much meat left. There wasn't much wood left. So if I'd used wood glue, I don't know, I just didn't feel so safe doing it. Once I had the resin in it and the glass and everything, it felt quite solid, but this that you see me here holding is a 7mm length of hexagon brass stock. I had this idea, I don't know where I was, I think I was in bed, and I just had this idea of getting this and hammering it into a piece of wood, and then you'd be left with like a really cool hexagon looking brass dowel sticking out. So I thought I'd give it a go. Anyway, I did a few test pieces and it worked out really well, quite surprisingly well. I was a bit worried about doing it on this because I would have to do it once the frame has been put together, and one of the drawbacks about doing this is that the back of the wood will end up chipping out. So I've had to glue on these pieces of wood on the back. They're like backer pieces, so that when I nail it into the wood, it doesn't blow out of the back. So I pre-drilled a hole which was slightly smaller than that piece of brass, so that when you bang in the piece of brass, it'll sort of spread that hole, so it should be a nice tight fit. Got this old train track offcut, you can call it. It's like my little anvil. And with that sandwich between that sacrificial piece of wood underneath, I got a really, really nice fit. Here's another little stupid thing I'm doing. I'm using this disc sander to sand down the brass dowels that I just put in, which is quite risky because one slip of it, that sanding disc would have hit the glass, scratched it, and I would have had to start the whole thing again because the whole frame was epoxied in. There was no repairing that if that would have slipped, but thank God it all went down nicely. So I've got this all plugged with my hexagon brass pieces, and while I was making this, just a crazy thing, I by mistake drilled a hole when I was drilling the mortise for this joint here. I by mistake drilled a bit too deep, and I could have been annoyed, I could have got all annoyed with it, thinking that I made a mistake. It was actually the best thing that happened to me, because I had a piece of wood when I was putting in these brass pieces and I was banging it, a piece of dust fell out in between the two layers of glass, and in hindsight I should have sealed around the glass before I put it in, but I didn't seal it, and this little piece of wood came out, and I didn't know what to do. Then I had a thought. I had this hole here, so I got my hoover and I hoovered it up and it just came straight out. So sometimes we think that something bad is happening and oh no, you know, I really drilled it in the wrong place, but really God knew that that was going to happen, and he sorted me out and he made me drill it a bit too much, and then afterwards I managed to get rid of it. So had I have not made that mistake, I would have been stuck with a big piece of wood inside the piece of glass. And now I just went with a compressor and I did like that, and all the dust that was inside as well had been removed. So now I've got a nice clear picture. So sometimes, remember, sometimes when something bad happens, it's not actually that bad, and it's actually for your better. So that's just my little story. I've got this little dowel plug cutter, and here you actually see me cutting it out of a piece of end grain, which is a bit of a mistake because I was putting it in face grain, so I actually ended up taking it out. But this is basically what it looked like. I just didn't record me taking it out. But yeah, I just drilled a hole and I hammered it in. This is the same procedure I did for the right piece, but it looks sick. Once I'd cut it down and flushed it and sanded it, you couldn't tell. Even now, and if I look at it close up, you can't really tell where it was. Almost invisible. Just while you're watching me fill in these holes with this wood filler, I just wanted to take this time to first of all thank you for watching. If you're a long-time viewer of my channel, I thank you for coming back. If you're a new viewer on my channel, I hereby welcome you and invite you to subscribe. And if you did like watching this video, you just click on that like button. It doesn't cost you anything. It just helps me boost my ego and hopefully one day make something out of this YouTube channel. Now, you can't lie, the favourite part of any job is getting a bit of oil on wood and a bit of Danish oil on walnut. It just looks gorgeous. Takes it from this very pasty, whitey, brownish wood to a nice, shiny, glossy. Actually, not so glossy this. It's glossy while I'm doing it, but once I buffed it out and dried up all the oil, it just gave it a nice little finish. I didn't really want it to be shiny, so it actually made a really nice finish, this. And I think the brass looks very well with that. Look at that. What do you reckon? That's it, it's all done. And the writing with the black epoxy looked really well. So basically, I took this frame to my friend's house, and I gave it to him for the weekend to figure out exactly where he wanted it, whether he wanted to hang it up or leave it on the side. So I didn't install any hardware for hanging it up, and it was a good job I didn't do that, because he called me after the weekend saying he figured out he wants it to just stand on his sideboard. So I'm just making this little stand. I got a bit more walnut scraps. This is actually from a totally different piece, and I just, with like curve cutting, and if you don't know, curve cutting is basically just going over and over and over with the blade of the table saw. This one's set on like a 10-degree angle, so that when you put the picture in, it sort of falls back against the piece of wood that's holding it in, and that way it just stands on its own. It doesn't need any fixings, it doesn't need any screws or rubber or anything to keep it in place. It's like one of those phone cases that you get. And here you see me just sanding the edge of the stand just to get that same curve that I've got on the frame. And I'm just going over it with the router, getting a bit of a round over, and that's just basically it. Bit of oil on it, we're done. Let me know what you thought of this idea of having a photo frame not hung up, just sat on a sideboard somewhere.